Yo, what's going on, you guys? This is your boy RBG, aka the Random Black Gamer, here to bring you that breakdown / analysis on the Devil May Cry Netflix series trailer. I know I'm late to the party, but hey, better late than never, right? And this party is about to get crazy because I have a lot of details to point out to you guys that you're going to be very much interested in. But we gotta address the biggest elephant in the room, and that is Dante's voice. If you just so happen to be one of those individuals who has a keen ear for English dub acting, then you know that this isn't the voice that we usually hear with Dante, which is Reuben Langdon. Yes, this is actually going to be somebody else who's associated with the Devil May Cry brand, which has fans split right down the middle. I honestly can't blame people for being a bit disappointed that Ruben isn't going to be reprising his role as Dante, because he's been voicing the character since Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening, and he reprised his role in the first animated series we got back in 2007.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no olives, and be sure to make it large. Don't forget.
And I'd be lying to you guys if I said this wasn't the least bit off-putting, and that's because they have somebody who was already a part of that DMC voice acting alumni, which is Johnny Young BOS, who you may know as Nero. Yes, this guy, he's very much Devil May Cry adjacent, and it just doesn't feel right hearing a guy who we know to voice another character voicing the primary character, who's usually voiced by Reuben Langdon. That's the thing people have been put off on, and many are suggesting that it may have something to do with Reuben's political views, and that those said views may be the contributing factor to the recent lack of reprisal of his classic roles. And while that sounds plausible, I don't think that's necessarily the case, because I remember Reuben addressing this briefly and saying that he hadn't been formally fired or cancelled from the roles. It's just that he hasn't been in contact with Capcom or Hideaki Itsuno, who you guys know to be the director of the Devil May Cry games. Also, I want you guys to keep in mind that just because something outside of the Devil May Cry games just so happens to have the same name, does not mean that Capcom is in complete and total control of it. They are nothing more than a licensor, giving out the IP to another production so they can produce something similar, if not different, to what they already do with the games. Meaning that it most likely wasn't a mandate made by Capcom to blacklist Ruben from playing the character in the Netflix anime. He probably just wasn't in contact with those associated with this project. And I honestly just feel like that since this isn't necessarily the main game, like the thing that we love to play in regards to Devil May Cry, then it's not necessarily a necessity for the studio to pick him up. Devil May Cry 5, in my opinion, was a swan song to the franchise, and as you guys are aware, the person that's been leading the helm of all those games' development, Hideaki Itsuno, he's out the door. He's actually leaving for another venture, so it's pretty much up in the air if there'll even be another Devil May Cry sequel. And I know you guys are probably going to ask about Ruben's other video game Capcom related roles, and I'm just going to say this, in regards to his absence in Street Fighter 6 as Ken, he's not the only one who didn't reprise a character that they've been voicing since Street Fighter 4. There's also Laura Bailey and her husband Travis Willingham, who weren't brought back to reprise their roles as Chun-Li and Colonel Gao respectively. You gotta keep in mind that Street Fighter 6 takes place in the current time. Yes, this isn't a in-betweener game like Street Fighter 4 and 5 that took place before the events of Street Fighter 3. It actually takes place 6 years after that third installment, and 10 years after Street Fighter 2, and 9 after Street Fighter 4. So yeah, these characters have been through some things, especially Ken if you played the games. Now when it comes to Johnny Young BOS voicing Dante, even though it is off-putting, I'm pretty sure I'll get used to it as I watch the episodes, because he's shown that he can actually fit into a role, especially given his range. I mean, the guy is a seasoned voice actor when it comes to English dubs, so I expect nothing less from him. And here's a little fun fact that I think will make you feel better. Apparently Johnny was originally the first choice to voice Dante in Devil May Cry 3. And I say apparently because it's not necessarily set in stone if that's the case, but hey, I'm gonna take that word of mouth for it, because when it comes to Devil May Cry, you'll notice that a lot of actors that are chosen have worked in Super Sentai / Power Rangers related things. If you are a PR fan, you may recognize Johnny Moore as the character Adam, who plays the Black Ranger in Power Rangers. And before Dan Southworth was known for his role as Virgil, he was more known as the Quantum Ranger, aka Eric Myers from Power Rangers Time Force, which is a show that Reuben Langdon also did stunt work on, which was ultimately why these guys were casted, because not only do they provide good voice acting, they also are able to do a lot of the physical stunts, especially in the motion capture department. I also gotta quickly point out that Johnny Young BOS has tweeted that Ruben actually quit acting altogether, but he's determined to bring him back. There's also been murmurings of Ruben wanting to live a more simple life since he's been growing his own food and chickens and plans on moving back to Japan with his wife. Not to mention that Adi Shankar has gone out of his way to say nothing but positive things in regards to Ruben's performance as Dante. But anyways, I hope that clarifies any confusions that you guys may have had in regards to Reuben Langdon's status as Dante of Devil May Cry. I doubt it has anything to do with a blacklisting or cancellation of him playing any particular characters, especially within the world of Capcom. It's just all due to creative decisions, not to mention that the ship is kind of sailed with the mainline Devil May Cry games. As a matter of fact, the most recent Devil May Cry games, Devil May Cry Peak of Combat, they were trying to get him over there for China.
Oh, it's you.
But due to budgetary reasons, they couldn't get him, so they had to resort to AI, which is why the voice acting was so bad in that game and nobody cares about it. But anyways, with all that out of the way, we gotta talk about this trailer, man, because this thing has a lot of stuff in it, particularly from all facets of the Devil May Cry mythos. And I want you guys to keep in mind too that just because this is an anime related to Devil May Cry doesn't mean it's connected to the main continuity such as the games and expanded lore. This is very much a loose adaptation that's just gonna borrow all the different concepts from those respective lores and mold them into what Adi Shankar has described as his bootleg universe, which we've seen with other properties that he's worked with such as Castlevania. So if you're trying to make sense of everything and make it line up with stuff that you've read in things like the manga and novelizations, then don't, because you're going to end up fighting a pointless battle. Devil May Cry is very much a multifaceted universe in and of itself, and I doubt that the showrunners would want to be bogged down with certain restrictions that would limit them on the story that they want to tell. Now, what I will say is that although these things aren't necessarily adjacent to the main continuity, there are certain details that give you an idea of when this takes place. Based on the youthful aesthetic and the absence of Dante's iconic pistols Ebony and Ivory, this is very much a pre-Dante's Awakening version of the character, or at least he's on the cusp of getting to that. He hasn't necessarily tapped into his true potential in regards to his latent devil abilities. Another key detail that suggests that Dante hasn't awakened his full powers is the fact that his double-bladed sword, the Rebellion, which was given to him by his father Sparta, has yet to be awakened as well. If you look at his sword, it looks very similar to the first half of Devil May Cry 3, where the skull, which basically makes up the hilt of the blade, is a lot tamer. The mouth is closed and there isn't anything wild going on about it. But if you played the game, then you know that that tamed expression will change to a screaming one once Dante's blood comes within contact of it, awakening its true power, which will ultimately allow him to gain access to his devil trigger. For the most part, Dante prefers to stay in his human state. It's not until the party goes from being crazy fun to downright chaotic that he transforms into this state, or something else is on the line, as we've seen when he first transformed after getting serious with his brother Virgil, only to pass out shortly after doing so. And there is an instance shown at the end of this trailer where we see his eyes bloodshot red, which suggests that we might get that. Another thing that I want to briefly point out is that even though this is very much a youthful version of the character, his visual makeup seems to be a cross-pollination / reference to his past and former self. For example, his hairstyle looks strikingly similar to the one that he rocked in Devil May Cry 2. The amulet on his necklace has a similar aesthetic to its DMC Devil May Cry reboot counterparts, where instead of it being housed in some kind of metal frame like it is in the mainline games, it's nothing more than a bare jewel. Now when it comes to the actual clothing, his shirt looks very similar to the one that he wore in Devil May Cry 5, which was also a long sleeve V-neck shirt. And then we have his signature red jacket. I want to say that about 70% of this jacket is very much its DMZ3 counterpart, because you see the belt around the waist that looks awfully similar to the one that he wore in Dante's Awakening. You also have the gun harness going across his chest, but when you look at his shoulders, they look awfully similar to the leather padding that he had on his jacket in Devil May Cry 4. And you also have the rolled up sleeves that could be a reference to Devil May Cry 1 as well as Devil May Cry 4 and 5. I know this seems like a stretch, but I'm also reminded of that infamous photo Adi Shankar took upon revealing that he was working on the Devil May Cry anime, in which he dressed up as Dante and took visual cues from different versions of the character in the past and present. One of which was the DMC pendant, which you guys really had a problem with, which is understandable because some people just don't want to remember that game. But I actually love it. I love the fact that the showrunner of this show is acknowledging all the different parts of Devil May Cry, which includes the little blemishes that it's had in the past. So keep bringing on those references, man. I want all the smoke. But anyways, we gotta talk about this scene, which could possibly be Dante's introduction. You hear a narration from a guy describing Dante as something else, particularly in the way he moves and takes bullets. And as you can see, we have Dante himself surrounded by armed men in what looks to be his pub, which will either go by the name Devil Never Cry or Devil May Cry. There's also the one-off chance that this could be Gru's cellar, which is basically a dive bar that acted as a hub for brokers and mercenaries seeking work. It was the main base of operation for Dante during his earlier years, not to mention that he stopped going there shortly after the death of Nell Goldstein, who was the original creator of Ebony and Ivory. But anyways, many of you guys have said that this kind of feels out of the norm for Dante because he usually deals with demons as opposed to fighting humans, which these guys clearly are. But it's important to take into account that Dante did do mercenary work at first before ultimately becoming a full-time devil hunter. And as you'd expect, he's had quite a few run-ins with humans, one of which is Mad Dog Denvers, who I highly suspect to be the leader of this group who's trying to get rid of Dante by riddling him with bullets. And he's the one giving the narration in the first part of the trailer, because the way he describes Dante makes it sound like he's had multiple encounters with him.
This guy, he's something else.
Which is similar to the novel where he's faced Dante 99 times and loses for the 100th time in the first chapter. And in his final attempt to end Dante, he has a lot of men who are strapped to the gills with some heavy artillery, which is very similar to the heavily armed group we see at the beginning of the trailer. And like I said, this will most likely serve as the introduction of Dante as he showcases his physical feats while doing his signature sick tricks on them. Now, the way this trailer is sliced, it makes it look like he already has his red jacket on as he gets shot at, but in another sequence you see him without his jacket as he gets shot at, which leads me to believe that this scene will also play out similarly to how it did at the beginning of Devil May Cry 3, where we see Dante gradually dress into his usual getup as he fights off his enemies. It looks like he's performing his trickster style, which allows him to move rapidly fast and avoid bullets. You'll also notice that there are a few people that he's already taken out once you see him in his red jacket and he has his rebellion sword. Since there was never an illustration of Mad Dog Denvers, I'm not quite sure which one of these individuals could be him. I see one guy who looks like he's leading the charge that has a skull bandana on, so it could potentially be him, or it could be this guy who takes that 5-knuckle discount to the face. Who knows? I just can't help but feel like this is in fact Mad Dog, because some of the moments that you see up in this trailer are shot for shot what was described in the graphic novel. And then there's this scene with this alleyway where Mad Dog was killed by demons. I'm not saying it's him directly, but it's definitely got to be somebody that's inspired after the great Mad Dog Denvers. But moving on, after Dante makes quick work of these mercenaries, we see a guy standing in the background who I highly suspect to be none other than Enzo Farino, which is a guy who was considered the most reliable information broker in the city, who would bring mercenaries such as Dante high-paying jobs from clients. In most iterations, he's been described as a short and chubby guy, and looking at this guy who seems to be making a proposition for Dante, he fits the description well, but we'll just have to wait and see. But moving on, we gotta talk about this high-speed action sequence featuring Dante on a motorcycle. If you look at the license plates on each vehicle, you can tell that this is gonna take place in the real world as opposed to a fictitious setting like it does in the games. We're actually gonna be in New York, or at least in some part of this series. And I can't wait to see how this plays out, because in the video games, these locations are inspired at the real life locations with a medieval twist. And as you can see, this chase sequence is going to prove to be a very chaotic and destructive one, since cars are being tossed around and you can see collateral damage done on things like buildings. Also, if you zoom into the cars, you can see that there are two giant demons on top of them, which bear quite the resemblance to Agni and Rudra, who are usually known for being stationary characters who guard the gates after being locked in the Timina Gru by none other than Sparta, but for whatever reason are out and about on top of these vehicles, which is a trip to see. Similar to their video game counterpart, these are going to be demonic swords with their own two heads on the helms of those said swords that just so happen to be wielded by these headless massive demon bodies. Based on their color schemes, I think it's safe to deduce that the red one in the front is none other than Agni, who is the god of fire, while the blue one riding on the semi-truck is none other than Rudra, who is the god of storms. And if you played Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening, then you know that these guys can be very difficult upon your first playthrough. But once you best them in combat, they can become your best buddies on the battlefield in the form of devil arms, which are these devastating weapons that possess the power of demons Dante has slain. I'm not sure if that'll be the case for this particular show, but I'm hoping that they do stick with that theme. But moving on, we gotta talk about this shot, which features what looks to be a giant demon in the alleyway that Dante has to fight. We hear him yell his iconic jackpot catchphrase shortly before shooting the demon square in the forehead. And if you slow the footage down, you'll notice that the demon was actually holding what looks to be a human hostage, who sees one of her favorite earrings blasted through with Dante's bullet as it pierces through the demon's skull. But moving on to this next scene, we see this demon who everybody suspects to be none other than Arkham, who was a twisted and deranged zealot who would give up anything to obtain God status. After performing a failed ritual involving the sacrificing of his wife, he gained lackluster demonic powers. He had red and blue eyes, and he possessed the ability to transform into his alter ego, Jester, which looks like a clown. And just looking at this image of this demon, you can see the red and blue eyes, and he bears quite the resemblance to Jester, making it look like a cross-pollination of the two, or possibly him transforming into Jester. He definitely looks like a clown with the way that the blood is smeared on his lips, kind of like the Joker from Batman, which would sort of kind of play as this double entendre considering the fact that the character of Batman is associated with a place called Arkham, and this character could potentially be that. There's also the voice of this guy saying,
"His name is Dante."
That sounds awfully similar to that of the late Kevin Conroy, who also voiced Batman in Batman the Animated Series. But these are just wild theories, and we're just gonna have to wait to watch the show to get that confirmation. But next up we have this blue demon, which looks to be the Plasma, which is one of the more classical demons from Devil May Cry 1. These guys are made up of electricity, and they take on the forms of the opponents they are trying to kill, and based on the appearance in this one, it looks like it's taking on the form of a human since it has humanoid features. But it usually starts off as this blue bat that features a single red eyeball, which is exposed when it's about to attack. And I have a nagging suspicion that we'll be seeing this thing shapeshift through this fight that it's looking to have with Dante. In this next shot, we get what looks to be Echidna from Devil May Cry 4, which is basically a plant-based demon who usually resides in the Mighty's forest, but for whatever reason is out and about in the city area. Which once again, this is a reminder that this is very much a loose adaptation of all the things from Devil May Cry. This is an amalgamation of the things that we love from the games, placed into the crazy bootleg universe of Adi Shankar. And her design looks like it's been directly lifted from the video game that she comes from. Although we see the upper half of her body, she can actually take on the shape of a serpent or dragon and fly around the area that she's designated in. And she can also use her eggs/seeds as projectiles. But moving on, we see that this show isn't just going to be taking things from the games and novels, it's actually going to be taking things from other shows. Because in this sequence we see Dante burst through this restaurant and saves an innocent civilian, which looks to be none other than Cindy from the original Devil May Cry anime, which is a character that served as a waitress at a diner known as Restaurant Freddy, which just so happens to be the place in which Dante got his daily fix of strawberry sundaes. Just like in the original anime, she's going to feature a similar aesthetic of this reddish hair and a pink looking outfit, and Adi Shankar actually confirmed that it was in fact her after somebody asked about it, to which he simply replied with a bird coming out of an egg, which is basically saying that yes, this is an Easter egg to the original show. Now the last part we had to talk about is none other than the White Rabbit, aka Rabbi, who is featured prominently throughout the Devil May Cry 3 manga. This is a character that was essentially an overseer who was trying to keep a good eye on Dante and observe the way his powers were progressing. And once again, this is another character that looks like they were ripped directly out of the source material they came from. I love that it has like the monocle on the eye, which is usually not the case. He usually has like a pair of glasses, but no, it's just a monocle this time. But I do like the fact that you can see the stitching on his face. And he's another one of those demons in the upper echelon of the group where he possesses a lot of physical feats above average. And he's been known to take a lot of damage from characters like Dante with relative ease. But when it comes to the character of Virgil, not so much. And speaking of Virgil, we haven't necessarily seen him in this, but since we are seeing the White Rabbit, that could serve as a confirmation that Virgil is there, because White Rabbit, upon meeting Dante and fighting him, he flat out tells him that Virgil is in fact alive. While White Rabbit isn't seen in action doing much, I take it that he's going to feature some of the same capabilities that was featured in the manga, such as possession, which he can use on individuals as well as objects. And given the fact that you see him surrounded by these dolls, I wouldn't be surprised if he actually possesses one of them to attack somebody. But that's all I have for you guys today. Although there are other sequences that I could have pointed out, they're basically just things without context that I couldn't pick apart like I wanted to, so we're just gonna have to wait to see how it transpires in the actual show. But until then, let me know your thoughts on this. If there's anything that you guys did just so happen to pick up, let me know in the comment section below. As always, I asked you like or dislike the video. It doesn't have to be a thumbs up, it can be a thumbs down. But if you really enjoyed this video, it would help me out tremendously if you shared it with all your friends and followers on all the different social media outlets. Sharing really makes a difference. But once again, this is your boy RBG, aka The Random Black Gamer, signing out on another video. I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.